Some moments define who we are, not the medals on our chest or the accolades in our file, but the decisions we make when everything we've believed in hangs in the balance. For Major Katherine Mitchell, that moment came 30,000 feet above the Arizona desert, when she realized the enemy wasn't on the other side of the border. It was wearing the same uniform she did. What she didn't know then was that her father had faced the same revelation 10 years earlier, and it had cost him everything. This is the story of three generations who learned that defending your country sometimes means fighting those who claim to protect it. And it begins on a scorching day at Nellis Air Force Base, where the temperature on the ground matched the heat of combat 6 miles above. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on the tarmac of Nellis Air Force Base, heat waves dancing across the runway as ground crews scurried between aircraft. The desert air shimmered with temperatures approaching 110 degrees, but 6 miles above, where the atmosphere thinned into the domain of eagles and fighter pilots, the air was crystalline and cold. High above, a lone FA-18 Super Hornet carved through the cloudless blue sky, its twin engines roaring defiance against gravity itself. The $67 million aircraft, America's premier carrier-based multi-role fighter, twisted through maneuvers that would incapacitate an ordinary human. The red flag exercise, the most realistic combat training in the world, was reaching its climactic engagement. 4 veteran male pilots against 1 woman. The odds had seemed clear at the morning briefing. Inside the cockpit, Major Katherine Kate Mitchell felt her flight suit compress against her body as the G-force climbed. The specialized G-suit inflated automatically around her legs and abdomen, squeezing with increasing pressure to prevent blood from pooling away from her brain. 6G, 7G, 8G, the blood drained from her head, threatening to steal her consciousness. Her specialized breathing technique, the combat-proven hook maneuver, taught to her by her father when she was just 16, forced oxygen to her brain while her muscles strained against the crushing weight. Where other pilots saw stars and tunnel vision at 8G, Katherine Mitchell saw opportunity. 9.2 G, almost triple her body weight pressed down upon her, the same force that had caused many veteran pilots to black out. The edges of her vision darkened, but her mind remained razor-sharp. This was the moment that separated the good pilots from the elite. This was where instinct and training transcended human limitation. With calculated precision, she rolled the aircraft inverted, then pulled through a diving split-S maneuver. The heads-up display showed her target, an enemy F-16 piloted by Major Tom Anderson, a 20-year veteran with 3 times her combat missions. His aircraft passed beneath her, unaware of her position. She had him. "Splash 1 Viper," she transmitted calmly, the strain in her voice barely perceptible as her targeting system locked onto his aircraft. The words were professional, but they carried the quiet satisfaction of victory. "God damn it," Anderson's frustration crackled through the radio. "How the hell did you get behind me?" The red flag exercise, the most realistic combat training in the American arsenal, had just witnessed its conclusion. 4 seasoned male pilots defeated by a woman they'd privately dismissed as a quota case during pre-flight briefing. They hadn't known she could hear their whispers through the ready room door. Now they understood why her call sign was Kate. 20 minutes later, Katherine's boots hit the tarmac with a solid thud. She pulled off her helmet, releasing chestnut brown hair tied back in a regulation bun. Her gray eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the flight line where the other pilots were emerging from their aircraft. She noted Anderson's reluctant nod of acknowledgement. Not quite respect, but the beginning of something like it. She'd earned that much at least. Flight suits drenched with sweat, the pilots gathered for the post-exercise briefing. Colonel Johnson, the squadron commander, didn't smile often, but today his expression carried a hint of satisfaction. Mitchell, that last maneuver pushed past 9G. Most pilots would have blacked out. His eyes held a question. My father always said G-tolerance isn't about physical strength, sir. It's about technique and refusing to quit. Her voice carried no boast, only quiet certainty. The mention of her father cast a momentary silence over the group. Everyone present knew the name Mitchell in Air Force circles. Back in her quarters that evening, Katherine stood before the wall that held 3 generations of aviator history. Her grandfather's A-4 Skyhawk Squadron photo from Vietnam, William Mitchell, shot down in 1972, his body never recovered. Her father's F-15 Eagle from Desert Storm, where he'd earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for a mission that remained partially classified even today. And now her own Super Hornet. 3 generations of Mitchell pilots who had defended American skies, each paying increasingly personal prices for their service to country. The room itself was Spartan, as military quarters tended to be, but she'd made it her own with small touches. Technical manuals on advanced flight dynamics stood alongside dogered paperbacks of aviation history. A model of her father's F-15, hand-painted to match his exact aircraft, occupied pride of place on her desk. The walls held her own commendations, not as many as her father's had been, but she was still young. Time stretched before her, or so she'd always thought. She touched her father's Silver Star Medal, displayed alongside his weathered oxygen mask, the only pieces of him returned after his final mission. 10 years had passed since Colonel Robert Bob Mitchell had been declared killed in action, his aircraft supposedly disintegrating during a classified operation over terrain too hostile for proper recovery efforts. The official report cited catastrophic mechanical failure. Her mother had never fully recovered from the loss, passing away 3 years later from what the doctors called heart failure, but what Katherine knew was simply a broken heart. But questions remained that gnawed at her soul during quiet moments like this. Her phone buzzed with a message. My office, 700 tomorrow, important, Sullivan. Retired Colonel Frank Sullivan had been her father's wingman for 15 years. Now in his late 60s, Sullivan served as a civilian consultant at Nellie's, his legendary experience too valuable to lose completely to retirement. He had become Katherine's mentor, advocating for her career when others had tried to hold her back because of her gender or her famous name. Sleep came uneasily that night, fragments of the past intruding on her rest. Her father's voice from childhood flight lessons in his private Cessna. Eyes outside, Katherine. Feel the aircraft. It's not just a machine, it's an extension of your body. Then the memory shifted to her mother's face at the memorial service, stoic and broken simultaneously, accepting a folded flag on behalf of a grateful nation. Morning came too quickly. Katherine made her way across the base, the early desert air already warming with promise of another scorching day. She found Sullivan in his office, gray hair cropped in the same military style he'd worn for 40 years. His weathered face looked unusually troubled. Close the door, he said without preamble. She complied, noting the classified folder on his desk, red bordered with black stamped lettering. His voice lowered despite the secure room. This was declassified yesterday. He slid the folder across the desk. Your father's mission file. Katherine's heartbeat quickened as she opened the folder. Her eyes scanned technical data, mission parameters, flight paths. Then she saw it, the anomaly in the communication logs. This shows an external jamming signal locked onto his aircraft before the crash, she said, looking up sharply. The official report said nothing about enemy engagement. Sullivan nodded grimly. Because it wasn't enemy jamming, the signal originated from our side of the border. The implication hung in the air between them. Her father's crash might not have been an accident. It might not have even been enemy action. Someone on our side wanted him down, Katherine whispered, the reality crystallizing with terrible clarity. I've been pushing for this declassification for years, Sullivan said, his voice carrying decades of frustration. Someone high up kept blocking it. Now I know why. Before Katherine could process this revelation, Sullivan's secure phone rang. His conversation was brief, his expression darkening further. That was command. You're being assigned to a special mission, border surveillance along the Arizona-Mexico line, supposedly tracking drug cartel aircraft using military-grade avionics. Katherine's eyes narrowed. Why me? There are dozens of pilots with more surveillance experience. That's what concerns me. Sullivan leaned forward. The mission commander is General Douglas Crawford. The name landed like a physical blow. Crawford had been her father's commanding officer during that final mission. The man who had delivered the mechanical failure conclusion personally to her mother. The man who had subtly blocked Katherine's career advancement at every opportunity. You think this is connected? She asked, though she already knew the answer. I think, Sullivan said carefully, that the timing is suspicious. This file gets declassified, and suddenly Crawford wants you flying solo along a remote border sector. Katherine stood, military posture perfect despite the turmoil within. When do I leave? Tomorrow morning, 600. Sullivan hesitated. Katherine, your father was the best pilot I ever flew with, but he had one weakness. What's that? He trusted the chain of command implicitly, never questioned orders, even when his instincts told him something was wrong. Sullivan's eyes, faded blue but still sharp, locked with hers. Don't make the same mistake. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Mission briefings, aircraft checks, flight plan reviews. Katherine memorized every detail, noting that her flight path would take her dangerously close to restricted airspace along a section of border notorious for sophisticated cartel operations. During the technical briefing, she met Crawford for the first time in years. In his early 60s now, the general retained the ramrod posture and clipped speech of a man accustomed to immediate obedience. Major Mitchell, he acknowledged with barely a glance, I trust you're prepared to follow orders precisely on this mission. The emphasis on follow orders wasn't subtle. Always, sir. Her response was regulation perfect, betraying nothing of her suspicion. As she checked her aircraft that evening, Katherine noticed something unusual, a non-standard transceiver module installed beside her regular communication equipment. The maintenance log showed it had been added on direct orders from Crawford's office. The explanation cited enhanced communication capabilities for border operations. She made a show of inspecting other systems, then casually took photos of the module with her personal phone when the maintenance crew stepped away. She sent the images to Sullivan with a simple text, "Standard equipment." His response came an hour later, "Negative, be careful." In the pre-dawn darkness, Katherine made one final decision. She visited the base chapel, empty at this hour, and left a sealed envelope with Chaplain Garcia, a man she knew had been her father's confidant years ago. The envelope contained everything she'd learned about the declassified file and her suspicions about the mission. If something happened to her, at least there would be a record. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when she climbed into her Super Hornet. The startup sequence was familiar, a ritual that normally centered her mind. Today, each switch flip and system check carried extra weight. She was acutely aware that she might be flying into the same trap that had claimed her father. Kate 1, you are cleared for takeoff, the tower controller announced. Roger that, Kate 1 rolling. Her voice betrayed none of the tension coiling within her. The Super Hornet accelerated down the runway, afterburners engaged. The force pushed Katherine back into her seat as the wheels left the ground. The aircraft climbed rapidly into the brightening sky, leaving Nellie's Air Force Base behind. For the first hour, the mission proceeded normally. Katherine maintained her assigned altitude and heading, scanning the terrain below with both visual and electronic surveillance. The border between Arizona and Mexico stretched beneath her like a jagged scar across the desert landscape. Then came the first anomaly. Her radar display flickered momentarily, showing ghost returns that appeared and disappeared. Katherine frowned behind her oxygen mask. The Super Hornet's AN/APG-79 active electronically scanned array radar was one of the most reliable systems in the fleet. It didn't simply glitch. She ran a quick diagnostic. All systems reported normal function, yet the momentary anomalies continued at irregular intervals. Something was interfering with her radar, subtly, professionally. Nellie's control, Kate 1. I'm experiencing intermittent radar anomalies, requesting system verification. There was a pause longer than normal protocols would dictate. Then Crawford's voice responded instead of the controller. Kate 1, this is General Crawford. Your systems are functioning within normal parameters according to our telemetry. Continue mission as planned. Katherine's suspicion deepened. General officers didn't typically monitor routine surveillance flights personally. Copy that, sir. Continuing mission. 30 minutes later came the second disruption. Her secure communication system indicated an incoming message, but instead of appearing on her display, it triggered a warning that communications were being monitored by an unauthorized receiver. The non-standard module was active. Then Crawford's voice again. Kate 1, proceed to coordinates 339er by 1175. We have intelligence on possible cartel aircraft in that sector. Katherine checked her navigation system. The new coordinates would take her 3 miles deeper into Mexican airspace than her flight plan authorized, into a narrow canyon where radar coverage from U.S. installations would be minimal. Sir, those coordinates appear to be outside my authorized flight path and would place me in Mexican airspace without proper clearance. The State Department has secured appropriate permissions, Major. Crawford's voice hardened. This is a time-sensitive opportunity. Proceed immediately. Katherine made a split-second decision. Copy that, adjusting course now. She turned toward the coordinates but maintained her altitude at 30,000 feet rather than descending to the surveillance optimum of 15,000 feet. The higher altitude would keep her visible to U.S. radar installations despite the canyon. As she approached the coordinates, her threat warning system suddenly blared to life. Surface-to-air missile radar had locked onto her aircraft. Nellie's control, Kate 1, I have missile lock. Repeat, missile lock from ground installation. No response came through her primary channel. Instead, through the static, she heard Crawford's voice on a secondary frequency. Maintain course, Mitchell. That's an order. In that moment, Katherine knew with cold certainty. This wasn't a mission. It was an execution. She banked hard right, simultaneously deploying countermeasures. The missile launch warning screamed through her cockpit as 2 heat-seeking projectiles rose from the canyon below. Training took over. Katherine rolled the Super Hornet into a steep dive, then pulled up sharply, subjecting herself to punishing G-forces that threatened consciousness. The first missile overshot, confused by her countermeasures. The second continued tracking. Katherine executed a maneuver her father had taught her, unofficially dubbed the Mitchell roll, a complex combination of thrust vectoring and attitude adjustment that few pilots could perform without blacking out. 9G, her vision tunneled to a narrow point of light. Her anti-G suit squeezed her lower body brutally, forcing blood back toward her brain. The missile passed within 50 meters of her wing, its proximity fuse failing to trigger. But she had no time to celebrate. A second launch warning sounded, another missile rising from a different position in the canyon. Kate 1 to any U.S. forces. I am under attack at coordinates 339er by 1175. Request immediate assistance. Her radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice. Major Mitchell, this is Captain Daniel Foster, Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm in your back seat. Catherine's shock momentarily overrode even the threat warnings. Her aircraft was a single-seat configuration. There couldn't, be anyone in the rear compartment, which was filled with electronic equipment for this mission. What the hell? No time to explain. Foster's voice was calm despite the chaos. Your aircraft has been compromised. The missile launch was expected. This is about your father. Katherine had no time to process this information as the second missile approached. She jerked the stick left, then right, the airframe groaning under stresses approaching its structural limits. Your father discovered something called Project Condor, Foster continued, his voice straining as G-forces pummeled them both. They killed him for it. Same people trying to kill you now. The missile detonated meters from their wing, shrapnel tearing through the aircraft's hydraulic systems. Warning lights cascaded across Katherine's control panel as the Super Hornet shuddered violently. We're hit, primary hydraulics failing. Katherine fought the controls as the aircraft began to roll unpredictably. Who's they? Who sent you? Your father had allies, still does. Foster's voice tightened with pain. General Crawford is part of it. Project Condor isn't foreign, it's domestic. A black program using captured pilots to develop autonomous combat drones. Your father found out. The aircraft continued its descent, Katherine wrestling with failing controls. The ground rushed up at alarming speed. I need to set us down. There's an old mining road 2 clicks south. Katherine diverted all remaining power to the essential flight systems. Crawford knows you're too good a pilot to die easily, Foster said. That's why they added insurance. Check your fuel gauge. Katherine glanced down. The indicator was dropping rapidly, far too rapidly for normal consumption. They rigged a leak. Best case, we have 3 minutes of flight time. Katherine's mind raced through calculations and options. There's a dry riverbed within range. I'm taking us in. The Super Hornet screamed toward the earth, no longer a precision instrument of American air power, but a $30 million coffin. Katherine's hands moved with preternatural speed across the controls, coaxing the dying aircraft toward the only possible landing zone. If we survive this, she grunted through G-forces as she maneuvered, I want everything you know about my father. That's why I'm here, Foster replied. Crawford has maintained a private detention facility just across the border. They're holding American pilots there, testing the limits of human performance to program their drones. The ground approached with terrifying speed. Katherine deployed what remained of the flaps, fought for level wings, and prepared for impact. Brace, 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 she shouted. The Super Hornet slammed into the dry riverbed at over 170 knots. The landing gear collapsed instantly. Metal screamed against stone as the aircraft skidded along the desert floor, shedding parts with each passing second. Katherine's world became noise, pressure, and pain as the restraint system strained against forces they were never designed to withstand. Then stillness. Dust slowly settled around the shattered aircraft. Katherine's consciousness faded in and out, her body registering injuries through a haze of shock. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead. She forced herself to focus, years of emergency training taking over. "Foster," she called, turning painfully toward the rear compartment. "Foster." The compartment had been breached by a shard of the aircraft's frame. Foster was impaled through the chest, blood soaking his flight suit. His eyes found hers, clarity fading fast. "Find Chimera," he whispered. "It's the key, your father." His body went slack. Katherine knew immediately he was gone. With shaking hands, she reached for his ID tags but found instead a small metal data drive hanging beside them. She pocketed it without hesitation. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through the ringing in her ears. Not rescue choppers. These had the distinct sound signature of Mi-24 Hind gunships, Soviet-designed attack helicopters that shouldn't be anywhere near American soil. Katherine forced her battered body to move. The canopy release functioned despite the crash, and she pulled herself from the wreckage. Every movement sent shards of pain through her likely broken ribs. Her survival pack was still attached to her flight suit. She grabbed it and staggered toward a cluster of boulders 30 meters from the crash site. The helicopters appeared on the horizon, 3 of them flying low and fast. Katherine checked her sidearm, standard issue for border missions. The odds against 3 gunships were beyond impossible, but surrendering wasn't an option, not after what Foster had revealed. As the lead helicopter circled the crash site, Katherine took cover behind the rocks. She wouldn't go down without a fight. Her father wouldn't have. 3 generations of Mitchell pilots had defended American skies, and none had ever surrendered. The helicopters landed, kicking up clouds of dust. Armed men in unmarked tactical gear deployed, approaching the wreckage with practiced precision. Their equipment was American military grade, not cartel issue. "Check the back seat. Priority 1 is the DIA operative," shouted the leader in unaccented English. Katherine weighed her options. 15 armed men with helicopter support against 1 injured pilot with a sidearm. The tactical calculation was simple and brutal. Even if she took down several, the outcome was inevitable. She needed information more than she needed a heroic last stand. Her father had discovered something worth killing for. Now she needed to uncover the full truth and bring justice to those responsible. The search team found Foster's body first. "Sir, the operative is KIA," one called out. "The pilot's not in the aircraft." "Find her," the leader ordered. "She can't have gone far." Katherine remained motionless behind her cover, controlling her breathing despite the pain in her ribs. The team spread out, beginning a search pattern. It would be minutes at most before they found her. She made her decision. Removing her dog tags, she placed them under a rock, a small chance that if things went bad, someone might eventually find evidence of what happened here. She kept Foster's data drive, concealing it in a hidden pocket of her flight suit. When the first searcher rounded the boulder formation, Katherine had her hands raised. "Don't shoot," she called out, her voice steady despite everything. "I'm unarmed." The tactical team converged instantly, weapons trained on her. The leader approached, his face obscured by tactical gear but his bearing unmistakably military. "Major Mitchell," he said, not a question but a confirmation. "We've been waiting for you." They secured her hands with heavy-duty zip ties rather than standard handcuffs. No identifying patches or insignia marked their uniforms or equipment. These men didn't officially exist. "Who are you people?" Katherine demanded, maintaining the dignity of her rank despite being a prisoner. The leader ignored her question, speaking instead into his radio. "Package secured. Foster is down, proceeding to extraction." They led her to the lead helicopter, not a true Soviet-built Hind, she now realized, but an American-modified version with additional electronic systems mounted under the fuselage. As they took off, Katherine caught a final glimpse of her downed Super Hornet. A second team was already setting explosive charges. Soon, no evidence would remain of what had transpired here. The helicopter flew low, following the contours of the landscape to avoid radar detection. After 20 minutes, they crossed what Katherine assumed was the border, though no markings indicated the transition from American to Mexican territory. The terrain became more rugged, mountain ridges rising to obscure their flight path from satellite observation. They approached what appeared to be an abandoned mining operation, a cluster of industrial buildings nestled in a narrow valley. Only when they descended did Katherine notice the sophisticated security perimeter and concealed anti-aircraft emplacements. This was no cartel outpost. It was a black site with military-grade protection, designed to be invisible to satellite surveillance and deniable if ever discovered. The main structure, built into the side of a mountain, featured reinforced concrete walls and blast doors that could withstand anything short of a direct missile strike. As they landed on a marked helipad, Katherine observed multiple aircraft parked in reinforced hangars, some American, others of foreign design. An F-35 Lightning II stood next to what appeared to be a Russian Su-35. Most disturbing were the aircraft she recognized as having been officially reported lost in training accidents over the past decade. A pair of F-22 Raptors with distinctive markings she remembered from news reports of their tragic losses. This facility wasn't just housing pilots. It was collecting the most advanced aircraft in the world. They escorted her into the main building, through security checkpoints that required biometric verification from her captors. Heavy blast doors sealed each section, creating compartmentalized zones that could be isolated in case of emergency. The interior resembled a cross between a military installation and a research facility, with reinforced walls and security cameras monitoring every angle. Lab-coated personnel moved purposefully through corridors, carrying tablets and equipment. Most avoided looking directly at Katherine, though a few cast curious glances at the facility's newest acquisition. Finally, they brought her to what appeared to be a command center. There, standing before a wall of monitors displaying aircraft schematics and flight data, was a man in his mid-50s wearing an unmarked flight suit. He turned as they entered, his face triggering immediate recognition. Colonel Garrett, Katherine breathed in disbelief. Vincent Garrett had been declared killed in action 15 years earlier during a classified mission. He had been her father's squadron commander before Crawford. His official memorial service had been attended by hundreds, including a teenage Katherine and her grieving mother. Major Mitchell, Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Your reputation for exceptional flying skills wasn't exaggerated. That landing should have been unsurvivable. You're supposed to be dead, Katherine stated flatly. So will you be officially by tomorrow morning. Tragic accident, mechanical failure just like your father. Garrett approached her, studying her face with clinical detachment. The Mitchell genes produced exceptional pilots. Your G-force tolerance profile is remarkable, almost identical to your father's. The casual mention of her father sparked rage that Katherine struggled to contain. What is this place? What's Project Condor? Garrett raised an eyebrow. Foster was talkative before he died, I see. He gestured toward the monitors. This is the future of aerial combat, Major. Human pilots without human limitations. The screens displayed what appeared to be neural mapping overlaid on flight simulations. Pilot brain activity synchronized with aircraft response patterns. We're creating the next generation of combat aircraft, Garrett continued. Autonomous systems that think like the best human pilots but without fear, fatigue, or moral hesitation. Your father discovered our program 10 years ago. He was going to expose it. Because it's illegal, Katherine challenged. Human experimentation, unauthorized weapons development, treason. Garrett laughed without humor. So idealistic, just like Robert was. He couldn't understand that conventional rules don't apply to those securing America's technological dominance. He nodded to the guards. Take her to containment. Standard intake protocols. I want her flying aptitude and neural patterns fully mapped by 800 tomorrow. As they led her away, Katherine caught sight of another room through a momentarily open door. A room filled with what appeared to be neural interface equipment and simulation pods. Most chilling were the subjects connected to these systems. Men and women in flight suits similar to her own, their expressions vacant as technicians monitored their responses. They brought her to a cell block in the facility's lower level. The reinforced door closed behind her with pneumatic finality. The cell was austere but medical in appearance rather than punitive. Monitoring equipment lined one wall, and restraints were built into what resembled a hospital bed. Katherine methodically assessed her situation. Injured, captured, held in an off-the-books facility by people willing to commit murder and treason. The strategic picture was bleak, but Mitchell pilots didn't surrender to despair any more than they surrendered to enemies. A soft voice came from the adjacent cell. New arrival. Katherine moved to the small, reinforced window in her door. In the cell across the narrow corridor, a face appeared at a similar opening. A man in his early 30s with the bearing of a military pilot despite his haggard appearance. Major Katherine Mitchell, Super Hornet driver. She introduced herself, military habit overriding circumstances. The man's eyes widened slightly. Mitchell, any relation to Colonel Robert Mitchell? Katherine's heart rate quickened. He was my father. The man nodded slowly. Captain Ryan Carter, F-22 Raptor, shot down 3 months ago over southern Arizona. They said it was mechanical failure too. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Your father was a legend here. Here, Katherine pressed closer to the window. My father died 10 years ago. Carter's expression darkened. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. Major, your father was held here for almost 2 years after his shoot-down. He was their first prime subject. The world seemed to tilt beneath Katherine's feet. That's not possible. We had a funeral, a flag. His personal effects were recovered. Staged, Carter said simply. They've perfected the process since then. When they bring down a pilot they want, they plant enough evidence to confirm death while ensuring the pilot survives. Katherine's mind raced, reassessing everything she thought she knew. Where is he now? Carter hesitated. He died here, Major, but not before he sabotaged their program and inspired resistance among the prisoners. Garrett never broke him, and it drove the colonel mad. The revelation hit Katherine like a physical blow. Her father had been alive for years while she and her mother mourned. He had died a prisoner, likely under torture, without his family ever knowing the truth. How many pilots are being held here? She asked, her voice hardening with resolve. 12 active subjects, including me, all officially listed as killed in various accidents. They only take the best, pilots who demonstrate exceptional neural response patterns and G-tolerance. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching guards. Carter quickly withdrew from his window. They're coming for your initial assessment, he whispered. Resist mentally, not physically. They'll sedate you if you fight, and that's when they implant the neural trackers. The door opened, and 2 guards entered, accompanied by a woman in a lab coat carrying a tablet. Major Mitchell, I'm Dr. Stevens. I'll be conducting your baseline evaluation. Her tone was professionally detached, as if Katherine were a volunteer rather than a prisoner. Please come with us. Katherine allowed herself to be led from the cell. Now wasn't the time for resistance. She needed information, understanding of the facility's layout and procedures. Most importantly, she needed to find whatever chimera was Foster's dying message. They brought her to an examination room where medical equipment stood ready. Dr. Stevens directed her to sit on an examination table. "We'll begin with standard neural mapping," she explained, preparing an advanced EEG apparatus. Then move to simulator response testing. As the doctor worked, Katherine observed everything: the number of guards, the security protocols, the layout of corridors they had traversed. Her father had survived here for 2 years. He had even managed to sabotage their program. She was his daughter. She would do more than sabotage. She would destroy this place and expose everyone involved. "Your heart rate is elevated," Dr. Stevens noted, watching the monitors. "Try to relax." "Difficult under the circumstances," Katherine replied evenly. "Being shot down and kidnapped tends to increase stress levels." Dr. Stevens' expression flickered with something like discomfort before returning to professional detachment. "This isn't kidnapping, Major. This is national security." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Katherine met her gaze directly. "Does it help you sleep at night?" The doctor didn't respond, focusing instead on her equipment. The neural mapping took nearly an hour, during which Katherine learned the facility operated in 3 shifts, with security rotations every 8 hours. The information might prove useful. Afterward, they escorted her to a different section of the facility, a large room containing what appeared to be advanced flight simulators. Unlike standard military simulators, these included neural interface components and physiological monitoring systems. "Our simulator technology exceeds anything in conventional service," Dr. Stevens explained with evident pride. "It records not just your actions but the neural processes behind them. How you think when flying is more valuable to us than what you actually do." Katherine was secured into the simulator. Despite her situation, she couldn't help but note the system's remarkable fidelity. The simulated Super Hornet responded with perfect accuracy to the slightest input. "Begin combat scenario," Dr. Stevens instructed the technicians. The simulation thrust Katherine into a complex dogfight against multiple adversaries using advanced tactics. She recognized the scenario. It was nearly identical to one her father had developed years ago for elite pilot training. This was his work, stolen and perverted for their purposes. Despite her injuries and exhaustion, Katherine flew brilliantly. Not because she wanted to impress her captors, but because flying was fundamental to her being. Even here, even now, she remained a Mitchell pilot. After 3 grueling scenarios, Dr. Stevens signaled the end of the session. She was studying the data with intense interest. "Remarkable," she murmured. "Your neural patterns show the same anomalous processing in high-G situations that your father's did. It's almost as if your brain reconfigures standard response pathways under extreme stress." "Mitchell family secret," Katherine replied with deliberate flippancy. "My grandfather had it too." Dr. Stevens made notes on her tablet. "Colonel Garrett will be pleased. Your data may be the key to completing the Condor protocols." They returned Katherine to her cell. As the door closed behind her, she leaned against the wall, finally allowing her body to acknowledge its injuries and exhaustion. But her mind remained sharp, processing everything she had learned. Her father had been alive in this facility. He had resisted them. He had even managed to sabotage their work. And now she was here, not by accident, but because Crawford had deliberately set her up, just as someone had set up her father a decade earlier. When night fell, as indicated by the dimming of corridor lights, Carter's voice came again from the adjacent cell. Mitchell, you still with us? Katherine moved to the window. I'm here. How was your first day in paradise? His gallows humor reminded her of pilots everywhere, using sarcasm to cope with impossible situations. Enlightening. They seem very interested in my neural patterns under G-stress. Carter nodded. That's their holy grail, trying to map how exceptional pilots handle extreme G-forces without losing spatial awareness or decision-making capability. Normal human brains can't process complex information under those conditions. But some pilots can, Katherine finished, like my father. And you, apparently. Carter's expression turned serious. Listen, we don't have much time. The night shift makes their first rounds in 15 minutes. I need to tell you something. Katherine pressed closer to the window. Your father was a legend here, Mitchell. Not just for his flying, for his resistance. Carter's voice dropped even lower. The first month they had him, Garrett tried to break him with sleep deprivation and psychological tactics. Your father responded by reciting the entire pilot's operating handbook for the F-15 from memory, over 1,000 pages of technical specifications, just to prove they couldn't touch his mind. A fierce pride surged through Katherine. That sounded exactly like her father, defiant to the core, even in captivity. Carter continued. He didn't just resist them, he was planning an escape for all of us. He discovered a critical weakness in their security protocols, the same protocols they still use. Hope flickered within Katherine for the first time since her capture. What weakness? The Mi-24 gunships they use for perimeter patrol. They land for refueling at a remote pad 2 kilometers east of the main facility every 3 days. Minimal security because it's considered well within their safe zone. Carter lowered his voice further. Your father was a certified Hind pilot from an exchange program with our allies years ago. He was going to take one. Katherine's mind raced with the implications. Her father had indeed participated in an obscure pilot exchange program in the early 2000s, something she'd only learned about after his death. He'd never discussed it, as most aspects had been classified. When's the next refueling scheduled? Tomorrow night, 2200 hours. Carter's eyes met hers with grim determination. I've been waiting for someone with the right skills. Most of us are fixed-wing pilots only. I'm dual-rated, Katherine revealed. Rotary and fixed-wing, part of a special qualification program. Carter didn't hide his surprise. Just like your father, he hesitated, then added, there's something else you should know. The night your father tried to escape, he left something behind, something called chimera. He told me if anything happened to him and if his daughter ever ended up here, I should tell her about it. Katherine felt her heart stop. Foster's dying words, find chimera. It couldn't be coincidence. What is it? Where is it? She demanded urgently. I don't know exactly what it is, some kind of evidence, I think, but I know where he hid it. Carter glanced nervously down the corridor. There's a maintenance shaft behind the simulator room. Section 12, Panel B, he concealed something inside the wall there. He said it would bring down Garrett and everyone connected to Condor. The sound of approaching guards ended their conversation. Carter withdrew from his window with a final whispered message. Tomorrow, after final assessment, be ready. Katherine moved away from the door as the guard patrol passed. Alone in her cell, she carefully removed Foster's data drive from its hiding place and examined it in the dim light. Whatever secrets it contained would have to wait. Right now, she needed rest. Tomorrow would bring opportunity, but only if she was ready to seize it. As she lay on the narrow bed, Katherine thought of her father. He had been here in this same facility, perhaps in this very cell. He had faced the same enemy, endured their tests, and planned his resistance. He had died before he could escape, but his legacy lived on through what he had hidden, and through his daughter. She closed her eyes and could almost feel his presence. Colonel Robert Bob Mitchell had been more than just a decorated pilot. He had been her hero, her mentor, her compass. When she decided to follow him into the Air Force, he hadn't shown the typical father's worry. Instead, he'd simply nodded and said, "The sky's in our blood, Catherine. Some families are meant for the earth. The Mitchell family belongs to the air." The memory of his voice was so clear it brought tears to her eyes, tears she quickly suppressed. Emotional indulgence was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. There would be time for grief and remembrance after she'd finished what her father had started, after she'd exposed Project Condor and brought Garrett, Crawford, and everyone involved to justice. 3 generations of Mitchell pilots had defended American skies. Her grandfather had given his life over Vietnam. Her father had given his fighting a corruption from within that threatened everything they had sworn to protect. Now it fell to her, the 3rd generation, to complete the mission. Tomorrow, Catherine would make it 4, not in a Super Hornet, but in an enemy helicopter turned against its masters. The thought of what awaited Garrett and his operation brought a grim smile to her lips as she finally surrendered to exhaustion, Foster's data drive clutched in her hand like a talisman. In the darkness before dawn, Catherine dreamed of flying, not in military aircraft but in the small Cessna where her father had first taught her to love the sky. She was 12 again, her hands tentative on the controls as the plane responded to her touch. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly below, painted in hues of amber and gold by the setting sun. "You're fighting the aircraft," her father's voice came from beside her. "Don't wrestle with it, feel it. Listen to what it's telling you." "I can't hear it saying anything, Dad," young Catherine had protested. Colonel Robert Mitchell had smiled, that rare, warm smile reserved only for his daughter. "You're not listening with the right part of you. The aircraft speaks to your instincts, not your ears. When everything else fails, when instruments go dark and radio goes silent, fly with your heart, Catherine. That's what makes a Mitchell pilot." She awoke with his words echoing in her mind. Fly with your heart. The facility had begun its day cycle, lights brightening to simulate dawn in the windowless complex. Catherine sat up, wincing at the pain from her injuries but feeling a clarity of purpose that transcended physical discomfort. Today she would find Chimera. Tonight she would take the Hind. And tomorrow the world would learn the truth about Project Condor and the sacrifice of Colonel Robert Bob Mitchell. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, she would fly with her heart, and her father would fly with her. The second day of Katherine Mitchell's captivity began with the harsh fluorescent lights flooding her cell at precisely 600 hours. Military precision, even in a facility that operated outside military law. She had slept little, her mind mapping escape routes, cataloging security protocols, calculating odds. The pain in her ribs had subsided from screaming agony to a dull, persistent throb, a reminder of her vulnerability in this place where her name, rank, and rights meant nothing. Footsteps approached her door, the distinctive stride of Dr. Stevens accompanied by the heavier tread of armed guards. The cell door hissed open on pneumatic hinges. "Major Mitchell," Dr. Stevens' voice carried the impersonal efficiency of someone who had long ago separated her conscience from her actions. "Colonel Garrett was quite impressed with your performance metrics yesterday. He's authorized accelerated integration into the Condor program." Catherine stood, military bearing automatic despite her circumstances. "And if I refuse to cooperate?" Dr. Stevens' lips pressed into a thin line. "Cooperation is encouraged but not required for data collection." She gestured to the guards. "Escort Major Mitchell to the primary lab. The colonel wants neural baseline readings before the full cognitive stress assessment." They led her through the labyrinthine facility, a deliberate design to disorient prisoners, Catherine suspected. but her pilot's spatial awareness charted each turn, each security checkpoint, building a mental map. The corridors were identical in appearance but subtly different in length and configuration. Section markers on the walls provided orientation points. She mentally noted when they passed Section 12, where Carter had said her father hid Chimera. The primary lab resembled a cross between an operating room and a flight simulator chamber. In the center stood a modified version of a standard military flight simulator pod, bristling with additional neural monitoring equipment. 5 technicians worked at surrounding stations, their faces showing the flat affect of people who had walled off their moral qualms. Colonel Garrett stood observing the preparations, his back to the door as they entered. He turned, his weathered face showing a disturbing eagerness. "Ah, Major Mitchell," his smile never reached his eyes. "I hope you rested well. Today will be quite demanding." Katherine met his gaze without flinching. "Must be exhausting, betraying your country every day." The barb struck home, a momentary tightening around Garrett's eyes before his expression hardened. "My loyalty is to American technological supremacy, not bureaucrats who lack vision. The Condor program will revolutionize aerial warfare. By kidnapping American pilots and extracting their skills against their will." Garrett approached her, his voice lowering. "Your father said almost those exact words. The Mitchell righteousness, it's genetic, apparently." He gestured toward the simulator. "But we found ways around Robert's resistance. We'll do the same with you." The mention of her father being held in this same room, subjected to these same procedures, sent a wave of cold fury through Katherine. She channeled it, sharpening her focus rather than clouding it. "Dr. Stevens," Garrett called, "proceed with the full neural mapping sequence. I want comparative analysis against her father's patterns by this afternoon." As they prepared her for the simulator, Katherine observed everything: the location of emergency exits, the security protocols at workstations, the communication patterns between staff. Most importantly, she noted that her path to the simulator had taken her directly past a maintenance access panel marked Section 12B, the location Carter had specified. Inside the simulator, they attached neural sensors to her scalp and spine. The sensation was invasive, uncomfortable, designed to be so. The simulator itself was a modified F-35 cockpit with additional monitoring systems and restraints that could be activated remotely. "Today's session will measure your neural responses under extreme stress conditions," Dr. Stevens explained clinically. "The simulator will create scenarios that push beyond normal flight parameters." The canopy closed with a pneumatic hiss, sealing Katherine inside. The screens activated, creating a startlingly realistic virtual environment, a high-altitude intercept mission over mountainous terrain. She recognized the landscape: the Hindu Kush mountain range, one of the most challenging environments for combat pilots. "Begin Scenario Alpha 7, Garrett's voice came through the speakers. The simulation thrust Katherine into immediate peril: an F-35 damaged by enemy fire, multiple system failures, and dangerous mountain terrain below. Most pilots would have ejected immediately, but the scenario disabled that option. The only path to survival was a nearly impossible feat of flying. Katherine's hands moved instinctively to the controls, her mind calculating glide ratios and emergency procedures. Despite knowing this was a simulation designed to extract her neural responses, her pilot's instincts engaged fully. She felt the familiar surge of focus that had kept her alive through real combat situations. As she navigated the crippled aircraft through a narrow mountain pass, the simulator began adding physical stressors: increased G-force pressure, reduced oxygen levels, strobe lighting to simulate disorientation. They were replicating the physiological conditions of extreme aerial combat while monitoring how her brain continued to function. "Remarkable," she heard Dr. Stevens murmur through the monitoring system. "Her neural pathways are restructuring in real time to compensate for the sensory overload, just like her father's did." "Push it further," Garrett ordered. "Take it to level 9. The simulator suddenly pitched violently, replicating catastrophic flight control failure. The G-forces increased beyond what most pilots could withstand without losing consciousness. Catherine's vision began to tunnel, her breath coming in controlled gasps as she fought the physical effects. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The aircraft speaks to your instincts, not your ears." Catherine stopped fighting the simulator and instead felt the patterns in its movement, anticipating rather than reacting. Her neural reading stabilized as her approach shifted from mechanical response to intuitive understanding. After 3 hours of increasingly demanding scenarios, the simulator finally powered down. Catherine sat motionless in the cockpit, physically exhausted but mentally cataloging everything she had observed about the facility's systems. The simulator was networked to the main facility computers. She had glimpsed code sequences during brief system transitions between scenarios, information that might prove useful. When they extracted her from the simulator, Catherine deliberately showed more fatigue than she actually felt. Let them underestimate her recovery time. Let them believe she was more affected than she was. "Truly impressive, Major Mitchell," Garrett said, reviewing the data on a tablet. "Your father took 3 sessions to reach these levels. You've matched them in 1. "Guess I'm a fast learner," Catherine replied, her voice deliberately weak. Garrett studied her face. "Or perhaps more motivated. Take her to the mess hall. She needs nutrition before the afternoon session." The mess hall was the first communal space Catherine had seen in the facility. A dozen other prisoners sat at stainless steel tables under guard supervision. Most wore the same gray facility jumpsuits, though a few were in tattered flight suits, recently captured pilots still wearing their original uniforms. Carter sat alone at a corner table. As Catherine was directed to the food line, he carefully avoided looking directly at her, a practiced indifference that wouldn't attract guard attention. Catherine followed his lead, getting her tray of unidentifiable protein and vegetables before taking a seat at an empty table. Only when a guard shift change created momentary distraction did Carter speak, his voice barely audible. "Section 12B behind the simulator room. Maintenance access requires a code." He traced numbers on the table with his finger as he spoke. 71439. Catherine memorized the sequence immediately, giving an imperceptible nod. Carter continued, eyes focused on his food. "Tonight's the night. Shift change at 21:45 creates a 7-minute blind spot in the East Corridor security cameras. The refueling station is 2 clicks east through the drainage tunnel." "How many coming with us?" Catherine asked, her voice equally low. 3 besides us. Any more risks detection, the others understand." A guard approached their section, ending the conversation. Carter stood and took his tray to the disposal area, never acknowledging her directly. The practice coordination told Catherine that the captive pilots had developed sophisticated communication systems under the guard's watchful eyes, another testament to the resourcefulness that made them elite aviators. The afternoon session shifted from simulator work to direct neural interface, a more invasive procedure that mapped Catherine's decision-making processes without the intermediary of physical controls. Dr. Stevens explained it as extracting the pilot from the cockpit, isolating the pure neural patterns of elite aviation skills. "This technology is the heart of Project Condor," Dr. Stevens said with clinical pride. We're creating autonomous systems that think like our best pilots but without human limitations. You mean without human conscience, Katherine countered. Dr. Stevens paused, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. The ethical applications are determined at levels above my clearance. That's what the Nuremberg defendants said too. The barb landed. Dr. Stevens' hands faltered momentarily before she regained her professional detachment. Prepare for neural interface initiation. The procedure was uncomfortable but not painful. Sensors placed at specific points along Katherine's spine and skull created a direct connection to the facility's systems. As the interface activated, Katherine experienced a strange dissociation, as if her piloting instincts were being gently extracted and examined. She allowed it to happen, using the opportunity to gather intelligence about the facility's systems. The neural interface worked both ways. As they scanned her neural patterns, she gained fleeting glimpses of the system architecture. Fragmented data about security protocols, communication systems, and most importantly, the location of other captive pilots. After the session, Katherine was returned to her cell for neural recovery, a period of isolation meant to prevent neural pathway degradation after intensive mapping. In reality, it gave her precious time alone to plan the night's escape. The facility's night cycle began at 2100 hours with the dimming of corridor lights. Katherine lay motionless on her bed, counting minutes, synchronizing with the patrol pattern she'd memorized. At precisely 21:27, she heard Carter's signal, 3 soft taps on their shared wall. She responded with 2 taps, ready. The facility's designers had made a critical error, one common to those who built prisons for ordinary people rather than elite military pilots. They had underestimated the spatial awareness, timing precision, and improvisational capabilities that made combat aviators exceptional. Katherine had noted that the cell's ventilation system, while too small for a person to access, was sufficient to pass small objects between adjacent cells if properly manipulated. During her first night, she had discovered that removing the small metal bracket from her bed frame created a tool that could reach the ventilation slats. Now she used this tool to accept a small object passed through from Carter's cell, a maintenance keycard he had stolen months ago and concealed. The card alone wouldn't open doors, but combined with the emergency override protocols Katherine had glimpsed during her neural interface session, it created possibilities. At 21:42, exactly 3 minutes before the security camera blind spot Carter had identified, Katherine heard the sound she had been waiting for, the distant alarm indicating a minor system malfunction in the western sector. A diversion created by other pilots in the facility, designed to draw guard attention away from the eastern corridor. She moved to her cell door, inserting the stolen maintenance card into the barely visible diagnostic port near the bottom of the electronic lock. The port was intended for maintenance technicians to check lock functionality without opening the door. But Katherine had seen how the system architecture connected these diagnostic ports to the primary security grid. Using the metal bracket as a conductor, she created a short circuit between specific contacts in the diagnostic port. The door didn't open. That would have triggered alarms, but the lock entered diagnostic mode, which temporarily disconnected it from the central security monitoring system. Then she waited, counting seconds with the precision of someone accustomed to timing aerial maneuvers, where milliseconds determined survival. At exactly 21:45, she heard the faint electronic whir that indicated the security camera system entering its reset cycle during shift change. She applied pressure to the door in a specific pattern, 3 quick pushes followed by sustained pressure. Exploiting a mechanical weakness in the lock mechanism, she had identified during her entry to the cell. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Katherine slipped into the corridor, immediately pressing against the wall to avoid any potential camera angles. The hallway was empty, the guard patrol drawn to the diversion on the western side. She moved with deliberate speed toward Section 12, her steps silent thanks to the cloth strip she had torn from her bedsheet and wrapped around her facility-issued shoes. Carter emerged from his cell 30 seconds later, using a similar technique. They made eye contact briefly, no words needed between pilots accustomed to communicating under combat conditions, where radio silence was often mandatory. They reached Section 12 without incident, locating the maintenance access panel marked 12B exactly where Carter had described. Katherine entered the code he had provided earlier, 71439. The panel clicked open, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft. "Your father discovered this connects to the drainage tunnels," Carter whispered. "Maintenance never uses it because of the new access they built in Section 8. They slipped inside, pulling the panel closed behind them. The shaft was cramped, forcing them to move in a crouch. Emergency lighting provided minimal visibility, enough for navigation but not enough to work with precision. Here, Carter indicated a section of wall that looked identical to the others. "Your father said it was behind the third conduit junction." Katherine examined the wall carefully, running her fingers along the seams until she felt it, a slight irregularity in one panel. She applied pressure in different patterns until a small section popped inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a weatherproof military document case, the kind used for transporting classified materials in field conditions. Katherine removed it with reverent care, the last thing her father had touched before his final escape attempt. "We don't have time to examine it now," Carter urged. "The drainage tunnel is 50 meters ahead." Katherine secured the case inside her jumpsuit and followed Carter deeper into the maintenance shaft. The passage narrowed further, forcing them to crawl the final distance to where it intersected with a larger drainage tunnel, part of the facility's water management system for the desert environment. 3 other pilots waited at the junction: Captain Lisa Romano, Major Mark Henderson, and Lieutenant Commander Steve Bennett. All wore the same gray facility jumpsuits, all showed the physical toll of captivity, and all had the same resolute determination in their eyes. "Mitchell," Romano nodded in greeting. "Carter said you're our ticket out of here." "My father almost made it," Katherine replied. "We'll finish what he started." The drainage tunnel sloped downward, leading away from the facility toward the eastern perimeter. The group moved in silence, each person calculating the odds, measuring the risks against the certainty of continued captivity. After approximately 1 kilometer, they reached a security grate, the first serious obstacle. Henderson, a former Air Force combat controller with specialized training beyond his pilot qualifications, examined the grate's locking mechanism. "Standard reinforced padlock with tamper alarm," he whispered. "But the alarm connects to the same system as the perimeter sensors." He removed a small device from his sock, a homemade signal jammer fashioned from components stolen from the facility's labs over months. "This will buy us 3 minutes before the system notices the interruption and switches to backup." Henderson activated the jammer. The small LED on the alarm module went dark. Working quickly, he produced a makeshift tension wrench and pick created from bed frame components, similar to Katherine's but refined through months of secret work. Within 40 seconds, the lock clicked open. They removed the grate and continued through the tunnel, which widened as it approached the exterior drainage point. After another half kilometer, they saw it, the exit, a large concrete outflow pipe opening onto the desert beyond the facility's main security perimeter. "Wait," Bennett whispered, raising his hand. "Perimeter sensors. They'll detect our heat signatures the moment we exit." Carter nodded. "That's why we go at exactly 22:20. The Mi-24 does a perimeter sweep that temporarily deactivates the ground sensors along this section. The system can't distinguish between the helicopter's heat signature and potential intruders, so they switch to visual confirmation only during flyovers." "How do you know their patrol schedule?" Romano asked. "3 months of watching from my cell window," Carter replied simply. "The same window your father used," he added to Katherine. They waited in silence at the tunnel's edge, each lost in their own thoughts. Katherine used the time to examine the documentation case she had recovered. The case was sealed with a biometric lock, standard issue for high-level intelligence operatives. It would only open to specific fingerprints or a specialized override code. Her father's case, which meant... Katherine pressed her thumb against the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft click as the lock disengaged. "He keyed it to you," Carter whispered in amazement. "He must have had access to your biometric data from your academy records." Inside the case were 2 items: a military-grade data drive similar to Foster's but more sophisticated, and a handwritten letter on waterproof paper. Katherine's heart constricted at the sight of her father's familiar handwriting. She slipped both items into her jumpsuit pocket. This wasn't the time or place to read his final words. At precisely 22:18, they heard the distinctive sound of the Mi-24 Hind helicopter approaching, the heavy thrum of its rotors echoing across the desert night. Carter signaled for everyone to prepare. 2 minutes later, the massive gunship passed overhead, its powerful searchlights sweeping the terrain but not penetrating the drainage tunnel where they hid. "Now," Carter commanded as the helicopter passed. The 5 pilots emerged from the tunnel, staying low and moving with the disciplined coordination of military personnel, accustomed to operating as a unit despite never having trained together. The desert night was clear and cold. Stars spread across the sky in brilliant clarity that only came with the high altitude and dry air of the southwestern desert. They moved east across the rocky terrain, using natural formations for cover whenever possible. The refueling station Carter had identified was visible in the distance, a small, isolated structure with minimal lighting and a concrete helipad. 2 guards, standard rotation, Carter narrated as they approached. Light security because it's within their perimeter. They're not expecting threats from inside their own territory. Katherine studied the site with a tactical eye. The Mi-24 Hind had already landed and was being refueled by ground crew. Its massive form, nearly 60 feet long with a distinctive double-bubble cockpit configuration, dominated the small outpost. One of the most formidable attack helicopters ever built, originally Soviet-designed but modernized with Western avionics by whoever ran this operation. "That's our ride," she confirmed, analyzing approach vectors and guard positions. "Romano, Henderson, can you create a diversion on the far side of the station?" Both nodded. Romano had been a Marine Corps pilot before her capture, with additional ground combat training. Henderson's special operations background made him ideal for distraction tactics. "Bennett, you're with Carter. Secure the ground crew. I'll take the helicopter." They synchronized watches, a habit from their military training, and separated to execute the plan. Katherine circled to approach the helipad from the blind spot created by the helicopter's massive tail boom. Romano and Henderson moved to the opposite side of the facility, preparing to create their diversion. 3 minutes later, a series of small explosions erupted on the facility's perimeter, improvised devices created from materials Henderson had concealed over months of captivity. The guards responded immediately, moving toward the disturbance with weapons drawn. Katherine sprinted for the helicopter, Carter and Bennett converging from different angles to intercept the refueling crew. The technicians were taken by surprise, subdued with minimal resistance by pilots whose combat training extended beyond the cockpit. As Katherine reached the helicopter, she heard the alarm begin to sound from the main facility. Their escape had been discovered sooner than anticipated. She climbed into the pilot's seat, her hands moving instinctively across the unfamiliar controls. Her father's exchange program training rushed back, the differences between American and Russian helicopter design philosophies, the unique characteristics of the Heinz control systems. Carter secured the two technicians with their own restraints before helping Romano and Henderson board. Bennett took the co-pilot weapons officer position beside Katherine, his Navy background including rotary wing experience. "They're scrambling response teams," Carter reported, looking toward the main facility where lights were activating and personnel were moving with urgent purpose. 2 minutes at most before armed QRF reaches us. Katherine's fingers danced across the startup sequence, the massive Klimov turboshaft engines roaring to life. The Heinz distinctive cockpit, with its stepped tandem configuration, provided excellent visibility, a feature she would need for the night escape through mountainous terrain. The helicopter's systems were a hybrid of Russian design and Western upgrades, unfamiliar but not incomprehensible to someone with Katherine's training and instinctive understanding of flight dynamics. The weapons systems had been enhanced beyond the original specifications, creating a more lethal platform than the standard export model. "Response team approaching from the north," Henderson called from his position at the side window. "Armed vehicles, approximately 1 minute out." Katherine completed the abbreviated startup sequence, skipping multiple safety checks in favor of speed. The massive 5-blade main rotor began to turn, slowly at first, then building momentum. The helicopter shuddered as it prepared to lift its 26,000-pound frame from the ground. "Everyone secure," she called back to the passenger compartment. 4 affirmative responses. Katherine increased power, feeling the massive machine straining against gravity. The Mi-24 was not known for its agility. It was a flying tank designed to deliver overwhelming firepower while absorbing significant damage. But in the hands of a pilot with Katherine's sensitivity and training, it could perform beyond its design limitations. The first shots rang out as the quick response force came into range, small arms fire pinging harmlessly off the helicopter's armored fuselage. Katherine pulled collective, increasing power to maximum as she manipulated the cyclic control to lift the helicopter into a hover. "We need covering fire to make space for departure," she called to Bennett. He nodded, hands moving across the weapons system controls, deploying countermeasures and activating forward guns. The Heinz 12.7 Myakashev-Borzov 4-barrel Gatling gun responded instantly, sending a devastating barrage toward the approaching security vehicles. The response team scattered, seeking cover from the unexpected resistance. Katherine used the moment to transition from hover to forward flight, the helicopter moving ponderously at first, then with increasing speed as it escaped ground effect. She kept the aircraft low, dangerously low by conventional standards, using the terrain to mask their radar signature from the main facility's tracking systems. "They're scrambling pursuit," Carter reported, monitoring radio frequencies through the helicopter's communication system. 2 aircraft, unknown type. Katherine pushed the Hind harder, the airframe vibrating as they accelerated to maximum speed. The mountainous terrain worked to their advantage and disadvantage simultaneously, providing cover from radar but creating navigational hazards in the darkness. "Bennett, I need terrain following on the forward display," Katherine ordered. He complied, activating the enhanced navigation systems that painted a ghostly green topographic representation on their forward screens. Katherine flew by instinct as much as instrumentation, feeling the helicopter's responses through the cyclic and collective controls. "Aircraft closing from 6 o'clock, Henderson reported tensely. "Fast movers, likely fighter escorts." Catherine's mind calculated options, factoring their limited fuel, the Heinz performance envelope, and the pursuing aircraft's capabilities. A conventional escape was impossible. They couldn't outrun modern fighter aircraft. But conventional thinking hadn't gotten them this far. "Everyone strap in tight," she commanded. "We're going into the canyons." A chorus of concerned responses followed, but Katherine had already committed to the maneuver, banking the massive helicopter sharply toward a narrow canyon system visible in the terrain display. The Hind wasn't designed for the kind of flying she was attempting. Its size and weight made it unwieldy in confined spaces. But Katherine wasn't flying by the design specifications. She was flying with her heart, as her father had taught her. The helicopter plunged into the canyon, massive rotor blades seeming impossibly close to the rock walls on either side. Katherine flew entirely by feel now, the instruments unable to provide sufficient guidance for the extreme maneuver she was executing. The pursuing aircraft would have a choice: follow them into the canyon at night, an almost suicidal proposition, or maintain altitude and lose tracking capability. "They're breaking off direct pursuit," Bennett confirmed, monitoring their radar warning receiver, maintaining high cover and calling for reinforcements. Katherine navigated deeper into the canyon system, following a route only she could visualize, combining her spatial memory of the terrain with the helicopter's real-time feedback. The massive machine responded to her touch with increasing harmony as she adapted to its unique characteristics. "We've got about 160 kilometers of range with current fuel," Carter calculated. "Where are we heading?" Katherine had been considering their options since the moment they took flight. Returning to any U.S. military installation was too risky. They didn't know how deep Project Condor's influence extended, or whether General Crawford had authority to intercept them. "Sullivan," she said decisively. "Retired Colonel Frank Sullivan. He has a private airfield outside Flagstaff. It's within our range, and he has the connections to protect us until we can expose Condor." Carter nodded, understanding. "Your father's old wingman. He was on your father's list of trusted contacts." For the next 40 minutes, Katherine pushed the helicopter through terrain that would have defeated lesser pilots. The canyon system eventually opened into wider desert, allowing her to gain altitude and establish a more conventional flight profile. The immediate pursuit had fallen back, but she had no illusions about their safety. An unauthorized military helicopter in U.S. airspace would trigger every defense protocol in the region. "Bennett, what communications options do we have that won't immediately identify us to air defense systems?" He examined the communication suite. "This has been modified with diplomatic frequency capabilities, probably for covert cross-border operations. We could use the State Department emergency channel. It's monitored but not immediately tied to military response." "Perfect, give me access." Katherine established communication on the emergency diplomatic frequency, a calculated risk that might buy them time before fighter interception. "This is Diplomatic Flight Sierra Echo 7 requesting emergency corridor to Flagstaff Private Airfield. 5 American personnel on board, returning from covert operation. Authentication code follows." She recited one of the emergency authentication sequences she had memorized during her specialized training. Not current, but recent enough that it would create confusion and delay in the response chain. The response came almost immediately. Unidentified helicopter. This is Air Defense Sector West. Your aircraft type does not match any registered diplomatic flight. Squawk identity and maintain current heading for fighter intercept. Katherine had expected this response. Air Defense Sector West. We are flying a foreign aircraft following extraction operation. American personnel on board include POWs recently liberated. Request secure channel Delta 39er for verification. The channel she requested was reserved for Special Operations Communications, creating further confusion in the response chain and potentially reaching someone outside Project Condor's influence. "Stand by," came the tense reply. Carter moved to the cockpit, his expression grave. "They'll scramble intercept regardless. We need a contingency." Katherine nodded, already formulating alternatives. "Bennett, prepare the data package. If intercept becomes imminent, we'll broadcast everything on open emergency channels. The facility coordinates, Project Condor details, all of it. They can force us down, but they can't put the information back in the box." The helicopter continued its flight path toward Flagstaff, everyone aboard acutely aware that they were flying on borrowed time. The night sky remained clear, stars wheeling overhead in eternal patterns that had guided pilots since the earliest days of aviation. 20 minutes later, the radio crackled again. "Unidentified helicopter. This is Air Defense Command. You are ordered to land immediately at designated coordinates being transmitted to your navigation system." Katherine checked the coordinates. A remote desert location, perfect for a quiet interception away from civilian witnesses. Exactly what she would expect from someone trying to contain their escape. "Air Defense Command. This is Sierra Echo 7. Unable to comply. We are carrying evidence of illegal operations against American military personnel. We will only land at our designated coordinates or a major public military installation." Silence followed her declaration, the kind of silence that indicated frantic activity on the other end, as her message worked its way up the chain of command. Then a new voice, older, authoritative. "This is Lieutenant General Howard, NORTHCOM. Identify yourself, pilot." Katherine recognized the name. Howard was outside Crawford's direct chain of command, a potential ally or at least not a confirmed enemy. "General Howard, this is Major Katherine Mitchell, United States Air Force. I am piloting a Mi-24 helicopter containing 4 American military pilots previously reported KIA, but actually held at an illegal black site facility near coordinate set transmitting now. We have documentation of Project Condor, an unauthorized program extracting neural data from captured American pilots." The silence that followed was even longer. "Major Mitchell," Howard finally responded, his tone carefully measured. "You were reported down over Mexican territory yesterday. Air Sea Rescue found wreckage consistent with complete aircraft loss." That report was falsified by General Douglas Crawford, who orchestrated my shootdown to capture me for Project Condor, the same way my father, Colonel Robert Mitchell, was captured 10 years ago. Another pause. "You're making extremely serious allegations against a flag officer, Major." "Yes, sir, and I have documentation to support them. My father gathered evidence before he was killed trying to escape the same facility. I'm carrying that evidence now, along with additional data from DIA operative Daniel Foster, who died during my shoot-down." She could almost feel the calculations occurring at the other end of the communication. Howard would be weighing operational realities, chain of command protocols, and the political implications of her claims. Major Mitchell, I'm going to have a pair of F-16s escort you to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. You will land under their guidance and surrender yourself and your passengers to base security. Your evidence will be secured, and all of you will be debriefed according to protocol. Is that understood? It wasn't ideal, but it was better than forced landing in the desert. Davis-Monthan was a major installation with multiple command structures present, harder to disappear 5 pilots and inconvenient evidence. Understood, General. We will comply with fighter escort to Davis-Monthan. 10 minutes later, they detected the approaching fighters, F-16s moving into escort position with practiced precision. Katherine maintained a steady course and speed, making no maneuvers that might be interpreted as evasive or threatening. The massive Hind, designed to strike fear in enemies on the battlefield, now carried a different kind of threat, the truth about Project Condor. What happens when we land? Romano asked the question everyone was thinking. Best case, they secure the evidence and place us in protective custody while investigating, Carter answered. Worst case. He didn't need to finish. Everyone aboard understood the worst case, that Project Condor's influence reached into Davis-Monthan, and they would be disappeared again, this time permanently. That's why we're going to broadcast everything as we approach, Katherine stated firmly. Bennett, prepare all channels. Carter, organize the evidence packages from both data drives. We're going to transmit continuously from 10 miles out. Flight recorder frequencies, emergency bands, civilian aviation channels, everything. She turned to face the others briefly, her gray eyes reflecting the instrument lights. My father died trying to expose this. Foster died delivering evidence. We owe it to them to finish what they started, whatever happens to us. As they approached Davis-Monthan, Katherine felt a strange calm descend. She had come full circle, from the daughter seeking answers about her father's death to the pilot carrying his final mission to completion. Whatever waited on the ground, she had already achieved what Colonel Robert Mitchell had fought for, breaking open the secret that had claimed his life. The radio came alive with approach instructions. Katherine acknowledged them mechanically, her focus split between flying the unfamiliar helicopter and preparing for the critical transmission sequence. The F-16s maintained their escort positions, close enough to intervene instantly if she deviated from the assigned approach path. 5 miles out, Bennett reported, initiating broadcast now. The helicopter's communication systems activated across multiple frequencies, transmitting the compressed data packages Carter had prepared. Facility coordinates, Project Condor documentation, neural extraction protocols, lists of captured pilots previously reported killed in action. The transmission would reach not just military channels but civilian aviation frequencies monitored by commercial interests, air traffic controllers, and aviation enthusiasts across the region. The truth was now in the wild, beyond containment. The lights of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base spread before them, the runway approach clearly marked. Katherine could see the reception committee awaiting their arrival, military police vehicles, fire trucks standing by as protocol dictated for unusual aircraft, and what appeared to be a command group near the designated landing area. Final approach, Katherine announced, adjusting the massive helicopter's attitude for landing. Everyone stay calm and follow my lead once we're on the ground. The Hind settled onto the tarmac with surprising gentleness, its weight absorbed by the robust landing gear. Katherine executed the shutdown sequence with methodical precision, even as armed security personnel surrounded the aircraft. The F-16s made one final pass overhead before vectoring away to their own landing pattern. Keep your hands visible and move slowly, Katherine instructed as the rotor wound down. Remember, we're still American military officers. Conduct yourselves accordingly." The side doors opened. Military police approached with weapons at ready position, not quite aimed at them but prepared for any eventuality. A senior officer stepped forward from the command group, his insignia identifying him as a colonel. "Major Mitchell," he called above the dying whine of the turbines. "Yes, sir." Katherine stepped forward, standing at attention despite her gray prison jumpsuit and battered appearance. "I'm Colonel James Hargrove, base commander. General Howard has ordered me to secure you and your companions in protective custody pending investigation of your claims." Katherine studied his face, searching for indicators of trustworthiness. Her years as a pilot had taught her to make split-second assessments of both mechanical systems and human intentions. Hargrove's expression was guarded but not hostile. "We have critical evidence concerning illegal operations against American military personnel, sir. It needs to be secured immediately by multiple independent authorities." Hargrove nodded. "Intelligence personnel are en route from 3 separate commands, Major. Your evidence will be handled according to protocol." He hesitated, then added, "We received your broadcast. It's already being analyzed at multiple levels." A small victory, but significant. Katherine allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. The 5 pilots were escorted to separate vehicles, standard procedure for debriefing after sensitive operations. As Katherine was led away, she glanced back at the massive Mi-24 helicopter that had carried them to freedom. Its distinctive silhouette against the Arizona night sky seemed a fitting tribute to her father. Escape achieved in the most unlikely aircraft, just as he had planned. In the secure room where she was taken, Katherine finally allowed herself to examine the letter her father had left hidden with the data drive. The paper was military-grade waterproof material, the handwriting unmistakably his, the distinctive forward slant and precise formation of letters she had seen on birthday cards and notes throughout her childhood. "Katherine," it began simply, "if you're reading this, then my worst fears and greatest hopes have both come true. The worst, that they've captured you too. The greatest, that you found what I left behind and have a chance to finish what I started." The letter continued, detailing the evidence he had gathered about Project Condor, the neural extraction procedures, and the illegal weapons development program it supported. He named names: General Crawford, Colonel Garrett, and others higher in the chain of command who had authorized or concealed the program. The final paragraph brought tears to her eyes. "I've never been more proud than the day you earned your wings, Katherine. The sky has always belonged to the Mitchell family. Your grandfather gave his life defending it. I may have given mine exposing those who betrayed what it represents. If you're reading this, you've honored us both. Fly with your heart always. Love, Dad." Katherine folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her pocket. Outside, she could hear increased activity, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the sounds of an installation responding to a crisis. The broadcast had worked. Project Condor was exposed. Hours passed in isolation. Katherine used the time to organize her thoughts, preparing for the intensive debriefing she knew would come. She cataloged everything she had seen at the facility, every name, every procedure, creating a comprehensive mental record that would supplement the documentary evidence. Near dawn, the door opened. Colonel Hargrove entered, accompanied by a woman in civilian clothes whose bearing suggested intelligence community background. "Major Mitchell," Hargrove began formally. "This is Ms. Diane Crawford, Office of the Inspector General. She's been dispatched directly from Washington to take your statement." Crawford stepped forward. "Major Mitchell, in the past 6 hours, your allegations have generated a significant response at the highest levels. 3 separate commands have initiated investigations based on the coordinates and evidence you provided. Katherine straightened. The facility will have initiated scorched earth protocols the moment we escaped. They'll be destroying evidence. Perhaps, Crawford acknowledged, but they can't destroy the pilots they were holding. Satellite reconnaissance has confirmed activity at the coordinates you provided. A joint task force is being assembled for direct intervention. It was really happening. The operation her father had died to expose was finally being dragged into the light. "What about General Crawford?" Katherine asked. Crawford and Hargrove exchanged glances before Crawford replied. "General Crawford attempted to leave Joint Base Andrews by private aircraft 2 hours ago. He has been detained for questioning." The words landed with the weight of vindication, not just for Katherine but for her father and every pilot who had suffered at Garrett's facility. "There's something else you should know," Crawford added. "Based on the preliminary review of your father's evidence, the Air Force is initiating a posthumous investigation into the circumstances of his death. If the evidence supports your claims, his status will be amended from killed in action to died in service while prisoner of war." Katherine felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. The official acknowledgement of what had happened to her father, something she had fought for without even knowing he had survived the crash, hit her with unexpected force. "Thank you," she managed, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "You and the other pilots will remain under protective custody during the investigation," Crawford continued. "But I want to be clear, you're not prisoners. You're witnesses in what may become one of the most significant military justice cases in recent history." When they left, Katherine moved to the small window of her room. The first light of dawn was breaking over the Arizona mountains, the same light her father had seen on his final morning. She placed her hand against the cool glass, feeling the distance between herself and the open sky for which the Mitchell family had given so much. 3 generations of Mitchell pilots had defended American skies. Her grandfather had given his life over Vietnam. Her father had given his fighting corruption from within. And now she had completed his mission, exposing the truth and ensuring those responsible would face justice. Katherine thought of Carter, Romano, Henderson, and Bennett, pilots who had endured captivity with the same courage and resourcefulness that had made them elite aviators. They had followed her on a desperate escape plan, trusting in her skills and her father's legacy. Together, they had done what no single pilot could have accomplished. The neural extraction procedures she had endured now took on new significance. Dr. Stevens had been right about one thing. The Mitchell family did possess something unique, something that couldn't be fully captured by their machines. It wasn't just exceptional G-force tolerance or neural adaptability. It was something her father had tried to teach her in that small Cessna years ago, something that had guided 3 generations of Mitchell pilots through the most challenging conditions imaginable. When everything else fails, fly with your heart. As the morning light strengthened, Katherine made a silent promise to the father she had lost twice, once to a falsified crash report and once to Garrett's facility. She would see this through to the end. She would ensure every person involved in Project Condor faced justice. And then, when the skies were clear again, she would return to them, where the Mitchell family belonged. Outside her window, an F-16 took off from the main runway, climbing into the dawn with the freedom and purpose that exemplified American air power at its best. Katherine watched it disappear into the brightening sky, her father's words echoing in her mind. "The sky's in our blood, Katherine. Some families are meant for the earth. The Mitchell family belongs to the air." The sun climbed high over Davis-Monthan Air Force Base as the third day of Katherine Mitchell's new reality unfolded. Military and intelligence personnel moved with heightened urgency across the installation. the ripple effects of Project Condor's exposure spreading through the command structure like shock waves. Katherine watched it all from the window of her secure quarters, her mind calculating trajectories and contingencies as it always had in the cockpit. 3 days since her escape from Garrett's facility, 72 hours of debriefings, evidence reviews, and waiting. The protective custody that Ms. Crawford had promised was comfortable but confining, a gilded cage that still separated Katherine from the open sky. Her pilot's instincts rebelled against the confinement, even as her tactical mind understood its necessity. The door opened without warning. Colonel Hargrove entered, his expression grave. "Major Mitchell, there's been a development." He gestured to someone in the hallway. "You have a visitor." The man who stepped into the room moved with the measured precision of someone who had spent decades in military service, but now operated outside its constraints. In his late 60s, with silver hair and watchful eyes set in a weathered face, he radiated the quiet authority that came not from rank but from experience. "Sullivan," Katherine breathed, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. Retired Colonel Frank Sullivan embraced her with uncharacteristic emotion. "I knew you weren't gone," he said quietly. "When they reported your aircraft down, I knew." Katherine stepped back, studying her father's former wingman and her own mentor. "How did you get clearance to be here?" "3-star generals tend to get what they want," Sullivan replied with a thin smile. "And Howard wants answers as badly as we do." Hargrove cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to talk. 30 minutes, Colonel Sullivan, per the agreement." When the door closed behind him, Sullivan's official demeanor dissolved. "My God, Katherine, when I got that call—" His voice trailed off, the unspoken fear evident in his eyes. "I nearly ended up exactly where Dad did," she confirmed. "Same facility, same people. Crawford set me up just like they set up Dad 10 years ago." Sullivan nodded grimly. "The investigation teams reached the facility yesterday. They found it partially destroyed. Garrett initiated burn protocols when you escaped, but they recovered enough, and they found the pilots still being held there." "How many?" 27. All previously reported KIA in training accidents or combat losses. Some had been there for years. Katherine absorbed this with a mixture of satisfaction and anger. 27 pilots whose families had mourned empty caskets while they suffered in Garrett's laboratory. "And Garrett?" Sullivan's expression hardened. "Gone. Helicopter departed shortly after yours. They're tracking possible extraction routes, but he had contingencies in place." "Crawford?" "In custody at Pentagon, lawyered up immediately, claiming he was following orders from higher up." Katherine wasn't surprised. Men like Crawford always had someone else to blame when cornered. "There's something else," Sullivan continued, lowering his voice despite the secure room. "The evidence your father gathered, and what you recovered from the facility, it goes beyond neural extraction technology. Project Condor was developing autonomous combat drones that could replicate the decision-making capabilities of elite pilots." "I saw the technology," Katherine confirmed, "but there's more, isn't there?" Sullivan nodded slowly. "The targeting systems they developed aren't just designed for foreign adversaries. They included parameters for domestic operations, surveillance capabilities that could be turned against American citizens." The implications settled heavily between them. Project Condor wasn't just about military technology, it was about control. "We've only got the edges of it," Sullivan continued. "But what we've found suggests a network operating within military and intelligence communities, people who believe they're above the democratic oversight built into our system." Katherine thought of her father, held prisoner for years, fighting against this from within Garrett's facility. That's why Dad had to disappear. He discovered the domestic applications. And why they wanted you. The Mitchell pilots have always had something special, neural adaptability under extreme conditions that they couldn't quite replicate with ordinary pilots. A knock at the door signaled the end of their allotted time. Sullivan squeezed Catherine's shoulder. This isn't over. There are still people out there who want this buried, people connected to Garrett and Crawford who haven't been identified yet. What happens now? You and the other escaped pilots will be transferred to Washington tomorrow. Full debriefing at Pentagon level. Sullivan hesitated. Catherine, you need to be careful. Even with what we've exposed, there are powerful interests who want to contain this. The neural mapping they took from you and your father, it's still out there. And so is Garrett. After Sullivan left, Catherine sat motionless, processing the implications. Project Condor was larger and more dangerous than even she had realized. The technology developed from unwilling pilots wasn't just a military advantage. It was a potential weapon against the very principles those pilots had sworn to defend. The transfer to Washington came at dawn the following day. A C-37 executive transport with enhanced security. Carter, Romano, Henderson, and Bennett joined Catherine on the flight, all still showing the physical effects of captivity, but with renewed purpose in their bearing. They had been kept separated during the initial investigation, and the reunion carried the solemn camaraderie of warriors who had faced death together. Mitchell, Carter acknowledged as they boarded, his voice carrying respect earned in the most extreme circumstances. Heard they're calling it the Condor Files now. Catherine nodded. Any word on the pilots still at the facility? Medical evaluation at Walter Reed, Romano supplied. Some were in bad shape. Garrett pushed the neural extraction procedures beyond safety limits on several subjects. The flight to Washington passed in relative silence, each pilot lost in thoughts of what awaited them. Catherine reviewed the revelations from Sullivan, calculating implications and connections. If Project Condor had been authorized for domestic operations, the conspiracy reached into levels of government beyond the military chain of command. Andrews Air Force Base received them with subdued efficiency. No ceremony, no press. The low-profile transfer suggested ongoing sensitivity about the Condor revelations. A convoy of unmarked SUVs transported them to the Pentagon, where separate debriefing rooms awaited each pilot. Catherine's debriefing team included senior representatives from military intelligence, the Judge Advocate General's office, and the Inspector General, a combination that signaled the seriousness with which the highest levels of military leadership were treating the situation. The questions were detailed, professional, and exhaustive. Major Mitchell, the senior intelligence officer, began. We need to understand exactly what neural extraction procedures were performed on you during your captivity. For the next 6 hours, Catherine recounted everything. The simulator sessions, the neural interface, the data she had glimpsed about the autonomous drone program. She described Garrett's facility in precise detail, from security protocols to personnel structures. The investigators recorded every word, occasionally consulting tablets containing the preliminary analysis of the evidence recovered from the facility. Based on your experience and training, the JAG representative asked, what capabilities would the Condor autonomous systems have if deployed with the neural data extracted from pilots like yourself? Catherine considered carefully. They would replicate human decision-making in combat environments with superhuman reaction times. More concerning is their ability to operate without the ethical constraints that human pilots apply in combat situations. Could these systems be repurposed for domestic operations? The question came from a silver-haired woman who had remained silent until now. Yes, Katherine answered without hesitation. The targeting and discrimination systems I observed could easily be modified to identify and engage targets based on parameters defined by the operators. There were no built-in limitations regarding deployment zones. The implications hung heavily in the air. Autonomous combat systems with the skills of America's best pilots, potentially deployable against civilian populations. A technological nightmare scenario that violated fundamental constitutional protections. Late that evening, Katherine was escorted to secure accommodations within the Pentagon complex. The other pilots had been similarly housed, though they remained separated, standard procedure to prevent cross-contamination of testimony during ongoing investigations. Sleep proved elusive. Katherine stood at the window of her quarters, looking out at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. Somewhere in this city, powerful people were calculating how to contain the damage from Project Condor's exposure, perhaps the same people who had authorized its domestic applications. Her father had given his life to expose this threat. She had nearly lost hers continuing his mission. But the danger wasn't past, it had only changed form. As long as Garrett remained free and the neural data existed, the threat remained. A soft knock at her door disrupted her thoughts. The security officer outside admitted a military aide carrying a sealed folder. "Major Mitchell, the Joint Chiefs request your presence at a briefing tomorrow at 700. This contains the relevant details." The aide departed without waiting for acknowledgement, leaving Katherine with the folder. Inside was a single document, a briefing summary with the highest level of classification. The Joint Chiefs, along with representatives from key intelligence agencies, were convening to assess the Condor threat and determine response measures. Her presence was requested due to her unique insights into the Condor neural extraction methodology and autonomous combat applications. Dawn found Katherine in full dress uniform, borrowed from Pentagon supplies since her own had been lost with her aircraft. The uniform felt both familiar and strange after her ordeal, the silver oak leaf of her rank a reminder of the responsibilities she had carried before and continued to bear now. The briefing room deep within the Pentagon's secure interior contained the most concentrated collection of military leadership Katherine had ever encountered. Joint Chiefs in their respective service uniforms, intelligence directors in civilian attire, and specialized technical advisors arrayed around a massive secure conference table. Major Mitchell, General Howard, whom she had spoken with during the helicopter escape, acknowledged her entrance. "Thank you for joining us under these extraordinary circumstances." Katherine took the indicated seat, acutely aware of the scrutiny from the assembled leadership. She recognized some faces from news reports and official functions. Others were unfamiliar, likely from classified directorates that operated beyond public awareness. "Let's begin," announced General Robert Mitchell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. "This briefing is classified Top Secret Condor. We are here to assess the national security implications of Project Condor and determine appropriate response measures." A technical specialist activated the room's display systems, projecting analysis of the evidence recovered from Garrett's facility. Katherine recognized components of her father's data along with material she and the other escaped pilots had provided. "As you can see," the analyst continued, Project Condor represents a significant unauthorized weapons development program operating outside established oversight channels for approximately 12 years. The neural extraction technology has advanced well beyond what our official programs have achieved. General Mitchell turned his attention to Katherine. "Major Mitchell, based on your direct experience with this technology, what capabilities should we anticipate if Garrett deployed these systems?" Katherine rose, military bearing automatic despite the extraordinary circumstances. Sir, the Condor autonomous combat systems combine the tactical decision-making of elite human pilots with reaction times and G-force tolerance no human could maintain. More concerning is their potential for deployment without the ethical constraints that govern human operators. Are we talking Skynet? One of the intelligence directors asked, referring to the fictional AI system from popular culture. No, sir, Katherine replied precisely. These aren't general artificial intelligence systems. They're specialized neural networks trained on specific pilot responses to combat scenarios. They don't think independently. They replicate human decision patterns without human limitations or human moral constraints, which makes them more dangerous in some ways, General Howard added. They'll execute whatever parameters they're given without question. The briefing continued for 2 hours, technical analyses alternating with strategic implications. Katherine provided insights from her experience in Garrett's facility, clarifying capabilities and limitations of the technology she had observed. As the session neared its conclusion, General Mitchell addressed the core question. Our immediate priority must be locating Colonel Garrett and recovering the neural extraction data before it can be deployed. Intelligence suggests he's established a secondary facility, likely with external backing. External backing from whom? Asked the Air Force Chief of Staff. A senior intelligence official responded. We've identified financial connections to several private military contractors and overseas interests. Garrett appears to have developed contingency resources outside official channels, significant resources. General Mitchell turned to Katherine. Major Mitchell, given your unique perspective on Garrett's operations and your father's investigation, what's your assessment of Garrett's likely actions? Katherine considered carefully before responding. Sir, Garrett believes in the Condor technology with almost religious conviction. He sees it as America's technological salvation against peer adversaries. He won't abandon the program. He'll seek to demonstrate its effectiveness in a way that forces official adoption despite the illegal development methods. A demonstration? What kind of demonstration are we talking about? General Howard pressed. A combat demonstration, sir. Garrett will want to prove that Condor autonomous systems can outperform human pilots in actual engagement scenarios. The room fell silent as the implications registered. A rogue military officer with advanced autonomous combat systems seeking to demonstrate their effectiveness could precipitate an international incident, or worse. There's something else, Katherine added, her voice grave. Based on what I observed and what my father documented, I believe Garrett integrated a targeting parameter set that includes domestic surveillance capabilities. If deployed, these systems could potentially be used against U.S. citizens. The statement landed like a physical blow in the room. Several of the assembled leaders exchanged alarmed glances. That assessment is consistent with technical analysis of the recovered data, confirmed one of the intelligence directors. Project Condor appears to have incorporated domestic targeting capabilities under the classification Internal Threat Mitigation. General Mitchell's expression darkened. This is no longer just a matter of unauthorized weapons development. This represents a direct threat to constitutional governance. We need to locate Garrett immediately, General Howard stated firmly. And we need a countermeasure against the Condor systems in case he deploys them. All eyes turned to Katherine. Major Mitchell, General Mitchell said, you and the other pilots who escaped Garrett's facility represent our best hope of developing effective countermeasures. Your neural patterns were extracted but not fully integrated into his systems. You understand both the technology and its vulnerabilities from direct experience. Catherine straightened. What exactly are you proposing, sir? A special task force. You, Carter, Romano, Henderson, and Bennett, working with our best technical specialists to develop tactical countermeasures against the Condor autonomous systems. With respect, General, we're pilots, not tech specialists. Precisely why we need you. Our technical people understand the systems. You understand how to fight in the air. Together, you might develop strategies that could neutralize the Condor advantage. Catherine considered the proposal. It meant remaining grounded, working in laboratories instead of cockpits. But it also meant continuing her father's mission, protecting American pilots and the principles they defended from the threat Garrett had created. I'm in, sir, and I believe I can speak for the others as well. The task force assembled that afternoon in a secure facility beneath the Pentagon, a windowless complex of laboratories and simulation chambers normally reserved for classified weapons development. Technical specialists from DARPA and military research divisions joined the 5 pilots in what one scientist dubbed Project Raptor, the predator designed to hunt Condor. Carter approached Catherine as the technical briefing began. They're really scared, he observed quietly. Never seen brass move this fast on anything. They should be scared, Catherine replied. Garrett had 10 years to develop Condor. He's not going to just disappear with it. The technical challenge was daunting. Condor's neural mapping technology had extracted the instinctive responses of elite pilots, the instantaneous decisions made under extreme conditions that couldn't be articulated or programmed through conventional means. These neural patterns, combined with advanced AI systems unconstrained by human physical limitations, created air combat capabilities beyond anything in the official arsenal. The fundamental problem, explained Dr. Eliza Warren, the lead DARPA scientist, is that Condor systems don't think like conventional AI. They think like you, only faster, without G-force constraints and without moral hesitation. Then we need to think differently than we normally would, Catherine replied, an idea forming. We need to introduce variables the neural mapping couldn't have anticipated. For the next 72 hours, the task force worked relentlessly. Catherine and the other pilots alternated between simulator sessions and tactical discussions, while the technical specialists analyzed their approaches for patterns that might counter the Condor systems. Progress came in small increments, identifying potential weaknesses in the autonomous systems, threat assessment hierarchies, response latencies in complex decision scenarios, and predictable patterns in evasive maneuver selections. On the 4th day, as Catherine emerged exhausted from another simulator session, she found Sullivan waiting in the observation room. They found him, Sullivan said without preamble. Satellite reconnaissance identified a facility matching Garrett's operational requirements in northern Mexico. Remote location, unusual security, advanced communications array. Catherine's fatigue vanished. Is it confirmed? Not yet, but there's been increased activity in the past 12 hours. Intelligence assessment suggests preparation for operations. The demonstration, Catherine realized. He's going to deploy the Condor systems. Sullivan nodded grimly. Joint Special Operations Command is preparing a strike package, but they're concerned about the Condor air defense capabilities. If Garrett has deployed autonomous combat systems around the facility, a conventional assault could face unprecedented resistance. They need a countermeasure, Catherine concluded, something to neutralize the Condor advantage. That's why I'm here. General Mitchell wants a progress report from Project Raptor. He needs options, Catherine. The task force assembled for an emergency briefing that evening. General Mitchell attended remotely, his grave expression filling the main display screen as Katherine presented their findings. "Sir, we've identified 3 potential vulnerabilities in the Condor autonomous systems. First, they rely heavily on initial threat assessment paradigms extracted from human pilots. If presented with threat scenarios outside normal parameters, their response efficiency degrades. Second, the neural mapping process Garrett used prioritizes offensive capabilities over defensive responses. The systems are designed to win rather than survive, a different calculus than human pilots employ. Third and most significant, Condor systems lack the adaptation capabilities that define elite human pilots. They execute extracted neural patterns with tremendous speed and precision, but they cannot truly learn from unexpected situations. General Mitchell considered this information. Do these vulnerabilities provide a practical countermeasure, Major Mitchell? Yes, sir, we believe they do, but implementing it would require something unorthodox. I'm listening. Katherine outlined the countermeasure strategy they had developed, a combination of technological intervention and unconventional aerial tactics that contradicted established air combat doctrine. The approach was high risk, but exploited the fundamental limitations they had identified in the Condor neural mapping methodology. "You're suggesting we send pilots against these systems?" General Mitchell asked incredulously. "Human pilots against autonomous combat aircraft designed specifically to defeat them?" "Not just any pilots, sir," Katherine clarified. "The 5 of us who escaped Garrett's facility. We understand how Condor thinks because it thinks like us, only without our ability to adapt beyond our training." Carter stepped forward. "Sir, the Condor systems have our neural patterns from before we understood what we were fighting. We're different pilots now." General Mitchell's expression remained skeptical. "The intelligence assessment gives us a 96-hour window before Garrett likely initiates his demonstration. That's not much time to prepare for what you're proposing." "It's enough, sir," Katherine insisted. "We don't need to develop new skills. We need to apply our existing skills in ways the Condor systems can't predict, ways that contradict everything in our training and combat experience." After a tense silence, General Mitchell nodded. "Develop the operational plan. You have 24 hours. If it's viable, we'll integrate it with the JSOC strike package." The next day unfolded in a blur of planning, simulation, and preparation. Katherine and the other pilots worked with JSOC operational planners to develop an integrated strike plan combining special operations ground assault with their aerial countermeasure strategy. The approach was unprecedented. 5 human pilots deliberately engaging autonomous combat systems designed specifically to defeat human pilots. "This is suicide, you know," Romano remarked during a rare break. "We're literally flying against machines programmed with our own best moves." "That's why we won't use our best moves," Katherine replied. "We'll use our worst ones, the instincts we were trained to overcome, the approaches that contradict sound tactical doctrine. Fighting like rookies to beat a machine that thinks like aces," Henderson summarized with grim humor. "Only in the post-Condor world." The final briefing came at dawn the following day. In the Pentagon's Secure Command Center, General Mitchell presided over the assembled operational leadership as Katherine presented the integrated assault plan codenamed Operation Broken Mirror. "The JSOC ground force will insert here," she indicated on the tactical display, "while air support establishes a perimeter to prevent escape. Our 5-aircraft package will engage any Condor autonomous systems deployed to defend the facility." "What aircraft will you be flying, Major?" General Howard asked. F-35, sir. They offer the best combination of stealth, sensor integration, and combat capability for this mission. And your countermeasure strategy? Catherine exchanged glances with Carter before responding. With respect, sir, that information should remain compartmentalized. The fewer people who know our specific approach, the less chance of it being compromised before execution. General Mitchell studied her for a long moment before nodding. Approved. The operation launches in 36 hours. God help us all if Garrett deploys those systems before we can stop him. The pre-mission hours passed in focused preparation. Catherine and the other pilots received accelerated refresher training in F-35 systems. None of them had flown the advanced stealth fighter regularly, though all had qualification experience. Technical specialists installed modified electronic warfare packages designed to complement their tactical approach against the Condor systems. Catherine found herself in the simulator late that night, running scenarios long after the others had retired to rest before the mission. The weight of responsibility pressed upon her, not just for the success of Operation Broken Mirror, but for completing what her father had given his life to begin. You should be sleeping. Sullivan's voice came from the simulator room entrance. Catherine removed the helmet, rubbing her eyes. Too much to prepare. Sullivan approached, his expression solemn. You know, your father faced a night like this, the night before his final mission, the one that led to his capture. I found him in the simulator at 200 running scenarios. What did you tell him? The same thing I'm telling you now. Trust your instincts when everything else fails. Fly with your heart, Catherine finished. He passed that one along. Sullivan nodded. Robert was the best pilot I ever flew with, until you. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already honored his legacy. You exposed Condor. You rescued those pilots. You finished what he started. Not yet, Catherine replied softly. Not while Garrett is still out there with the neural data and the Condor systems. Then finish it tomorrow, but do what your father couldn't, come back alive. The mission launched from a forward operating base near the Mexico border. 5 F-35s carrying the pilots who had escaped Garrett's facility, accompanied by the JSOC assault package in stealth-modified helicopters. Catherine led the formation, her call sign for the operation appropriately designated Raptor 1. Pre-dawn darkness shrouded their approach as they crossed into Mexican airspace under diplomatic clearance hastily arranged through back channels. The Mexican government, alarmed by the prospect of advanced autonomous weapons systems operating from their territory, had granted limited authorization for the operation while maintaining public deniability. Raptor flight, maintain course and altitude, Catherine instructed over the secure channel. AWACS reports clear approach corridor to target area. The supporting E-3 Sentry aircraft maintained position well north of the border, its powerful radar systems providing situational awareness while remaining outside potential engagement range of the Condor systems. As they approached the target area, a remote compound nestled in the Sierra Madre Mountains, Catherine felt a familiar calm descend. The pre-combat mental state that elite pilots cultivated, hyper-aware yet detached, processing information at speeds that would appear superhuman to non-aviators. AWACS to Raptor 1, we have radar emissions from the target area. Unknown classification, high probability of autonomous defense systems activating. Roger AWACS, Raptor flight, implement electronic warfare protocols and prepare for engagement as briefed. The modified electronic warfare packages activated, projecting specialized signal patterns designed to introduce uncertainties into the Condor targeting systems. It wouldn't prevent detection, but it might create enough targeting ambiguity to give them critical advantages. Raptor 1, this is Striker Actual, came the voice of the JSOC Ground Force Commander. Strike Team is in position awaiting air superiority confirmation. Copy Striker, we're proceeding with Phase 1 now. Katherine led the formation toward the facility, sensors probing for defensive systems. The compound appeared on their advanced electro-optical systems, a collection of reinforced structures with a small runway and multiple defensive positions. Most ominous were the aircraft shelters on the northern perimeter, their doors now opening to reveal dark shapes within. Contact, multiple aircraft launching from target facility, reported Carter from Raptor 2 position. Configuration matches experimental autonomous combat platforms documented in Condor files. Confirmed, Katherine acknowledged, watching as 4 sleek, unmanned aircraft rose from the facility. Their design was unfamiliar, a hybrid configuration incorporating elements from several fifth-generation fighter platforms, but optimized for unmanned operation without human physiological constraints. All Raptors, implement countermeasure protocol Sierra. Engage as briefed. Katherine's voice remained calm despite the gravity of the moment. They were about to engage the most advanced autonomous combat systems ever developed, machines designed to outperform human pilots using their own neural patterns. The formation split as planned, each pilot implementing the unconventional tactics they had developed to counter the Condor systems. Instead of maintaining optimal energy management, as their training and instincts demanded, they deliberately sacrificed energy state in ways that contradicted sound tactical doctrine. Instead of maintaining mutual support positions, they created seemingly random spacing that defied conventional formation logic. The Condor systems responded exactly as predicted, initially maintaining perfect tactical positioning based on the extracted neural patterns of elite pilots. But as the F-35s moved in increasingly unorthodox patterns, the autonomous systems began showing subtle hesitations, millisecond delays in response as they encountered human behavior patterns outside their neural programming parameters. "It's working," Romano reported, her voice tense with concentration. "Condor 3 is showing degraded response times to multiple aspect changes." Katherine engaged directly with the lead Condor platform, designated Alpha, flying in ways that contradicted everything she had been taught. Where optimal tactics called for maintaining energy, she deliberately bleeded. Where doctrine demanded maximizing separation during defensive maneuvers, she minimized it. She flew like a rookie making fundamental mistakes, except each mistake was precisely calculated to exploit gaps in the Condor neural mapping. The autonomous system responded with incredible speed and precision, but increasingly predictable patterns as Katherine's unorthodox approaches forced it to default to baseline programming rather than adapted neural responses. The machine could outperform any human in executing optimal tactics, but it couldn't comprehend deliberately suboptimal approaches that served hidden tactical purposes. Raptor 1, tally hostile Alpha in weapons envelope, Katherine reported as her targeting system achieved lock. Fox 3, the advanced medium-range air-to-air missile launched from her F-35's internal bay, streaking toward the Condor Alpha platform. The autonomous system executed a perfect evasive maneuver, exactly the response Katherine had anticipated. She had already launched a second missile on a trajectory that intersected with the Condor's predictable evasion path. The autonomous aircraft flew directly into the second missile's path, unable to conceptualize the deliberately inefficient double-launch strategy Katherine had employed. Splash 1 Condor Alpha, she reported as the unmanned aircraft disintegrated in a ball of flame. Striker Actual, We are engaging remaining Condor platforms. Stand by for assault clearance. The aerial battle continued for 12 minutes, an eternity in modern air combat terms. The human pilots employed increasingly unorthodox tactics, forcing the Condor systems further from their neural-mapped responses and into predictable baseline behaviors. One by one, the autonomous platforms fell to the deliberately flawed approaches that no properly trained human pilot would employ, but which the machines couldn't adapt to counter. Raptor 1 to Striker Actual, airspace is clear. You are cleared for assault phase. Copy that, Raptor 1. Strike team moving to objective now. Katherine maintained a combat air patrol position as the JSOC helicopters approached the facility. Ground-based defensive systems activated, but were quickly neutralized by precision strikes from the F-35s. The strike team fast-roped into the compound, encountering less resistance than anticipated as they secured the main structures. Raptor 1, be advised, came the strike commander's voice 20 minutes later. We have secured the primary objective and the Condor servers. Garrett is not on site. Repeat, primary target is not on location. Katherine absorbed this information with mixed emotions. The operation had succeeded in capturing the Condor technology and destroying the autonomous platforms, but Garrett himself had escaped. Acknowledged, Striker. Maintain security perimeter. We're monitoring for additional threats. The post-operation extraction proceeded without further engagement. The Condor servers were secured for transport, along with all documentation and equipment related to the neural extraction technology. Technical specialists began immediate analysis of the captured systems, confirming that the primary Condor neural database had been secured intact. As the mission package returned to U.S. airspace, Katherine maintained a watchful rear guard position. The weight of partial victory settled upon her. They had neutralized the immediate threat, but Garrett remained at large, potentially with backup data and the knowledge to recreate the Condor systems. The debriefing at the Pentagon the following day was subdued despite the operation's tactical success. The 5 pilots provided detailed accounts of their engagements with the Condor platforms, while the JSOC commander reported on the intelligence gathered from the captured facility. The servers contain complete neural mapping data for 39 American pilots, the intelligence director summarized, including both Major Mitchell and her father. We've confirmed that Garrett was developing these systems for deployment against both foreign and domestic targets. And Garrett himself, General Mitchell asked. Intelligence suggests he departed the facility approximately 12 hours before our operation. We're tracking several possible exit vectors, but he likely had escape plans prepared well in advance. The threat remains as long as he's free, Katherine stated, voicing what everyone in the room understood. He has the knowledge to recreate Condor, even without the hardware we captured. General Mitchell nodded gravely. Which is why we're maintaining the Raptor task force. Your successful countermeasure strategy proves we need pilots who understand how to fight these systems if they reappear. Katherine exchanged glances with Carter and the others. The implied mission was clear. They would continue hunting Garrett and any reconstituted Condor program he might establish. 3 days later, Katherine stood at her father's grave in Arlington National Cemetery. The simple white marker had been updated with a new inscription acknowledging his true status, no longer killed in action, but died as prisoner of war in service to his country. A small but significant correction that restored his true sacrifice to the official record. Sullivan stood beside her, both in dress uniform, rendering honors to the man who had connected their lives. The investigation had fully vindicated Colonel Robert Mitchell, confirming that he had discovered Project Condor's domestic targeting capabilities and had been deliberately shot down to prevent him from exposing the program. "He would be proud," Sullivan said quietly, "not just of what you did, but how you did it. Flying against your training to defeat systems built on that same training. He would have appreciated the irony." Katherine smiled faintly. "He always said the best pilots know when to break the rules." As they turned to leave, Katherine noticed a man in civilian clothes watching from a respectful distance. General Howard in plain clothes, maintaining the confidentiality of their continuing mission. "They've found something, haven't they?" Katherine asked Sullivan, recognizing the subtle signals of operational development. Sullivan nodded slightly. Intelligence picked up communications consistent with Garrett's patterns. Eastern Europe, probable contact with former defense officials from several nations. Selling Condor to the highest bidder. Or building new partnerships to continue development. Either way, it represents a critical threat. Katherine took a final look at her father's grave. 3 generations of Mitchell pilots had defended American skies through different wars and challenges. Her grandfather had given his life over Vietnam in conventional combat. Her father had sacrificed his exposing an internal threat to the very principles those skies represented. Now the responsibility fell to her, the 3rd generation, to complete the mission they had begun. "When do we leave?" she asked simply. "Wheels up at 600 tomorrow. Carter, Romano, Henderson, and Bennett are already preparing. The Raptor team remains active until Garrett and any remaining Condor technology are neutralized." Katherine nodded, the familiar pre-mission focus already settling into place. Garrett had escaped the immediate operation, but his ultimate defeat was only a matter of time. The Mitchell family had always belonged to the air, and she would honor that legacy by ensuring that the skies remained a domain where human courage and judgment prevailed against those who would replace them with soulless automation. As they walked from Arlington's hallowed grounds, Katherine thought of her father's words that had guided her through the darkest moments. "When everything else fails, fly with your heart." The mission ahead would demand everything she had learned as a pilot, everything she had endured as a captive, and everything she had discovered about herself in between. Garrett and his Condor technology remained a threat, but they had forgotten the most important lesson of aerial combat. The machine is never greater than those who fly with both skill and purpose. Katherine Mitchell would see this mission through to its conclusion, wherever it led. For her father, for the pilots who had suffered at Garrett's facility, and for the principles that 3 generations of Mitchell pilots had defended with their lives. The sky was calling, and as always she would answer. A note from the author. To my readers, many of you who remember when the skies belonged to those brave enough to trust their instincts and their training, thank you for journeying with Katherine Mitchell through this story of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds between generations. I wrote this story because I believe in certain timeless truths. That honor still matters, that some principles are worth defending at any cost, and that technology, no matter how advanced, can never fully replace the human heart and spirit. In an age where we're increasingly told that machines can do everything better than we can, I wanted to remind us all that there are some things that will always require a human touch: judgment, compassion, adaptation, and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than ourselves. Katherine's story is fictional, but the questions it raises are very real. As we develop ever more sophisticated autonomous systems, we must never forget to ask not just, can we build this, but should we build this? The real heroes of this story aren't the advanced aircraft or the neural mapping technology. They're the pilots who refuse to let their humanity be stripped away, who held onto their principles even when it would have been easier to surrender. For those of you who served, who know what it means to wear the uniform and make the hard choices, I hope this story honors that experience. For those who lost loved ones to classified missions or unexplained accidents, I hope Catherine's discovery of her father's truth brings a measure of catharsis. And for all of you, I hope this reminds you that we must always remain vigilant, not just against threats from outside, but against those who would compromise our values from within. The Mitchell family's motto, "Fly with your heart," is more than just a piece of dialogue. It's a philosophy for living. In everything we do, whether in the cockpit of an aircraft or in the challenges of daily life, we face a choice: to let others dictate our path or to trust our own judgment and moral compass. Catherine chose the latter, as her father and grandfather did before her. I hope reading her story inspires you to do the same. This story remains unfinished because the battle Catherine fights, the battle to preserve human judgment and ethics in an increasingly automated world, continues every day in ways both large and small. Garrett is still out there, not as a specific person, but as a mindset that values efficiency over ethics, results over righteousness. We all have a role to play in ensuring that mindset doesn't prevail. Thank you for reading, for caring about these characters, and for believing that honor, courage, and principle still matter in our modern world. Your support means everything to a storyteller trying to remind us all of the values that made this country great, and that will keep it great if we have the courage to defend them. May your skies always be clear, and may you always fly with your heart. With gratitude and respect. The author,